cabin fell silent the moment security marched down the aisle, eyes locked on a single woman who sat quietly in her seat, unaware that her entire world and the airline's future was about to change forever. Passengers glanced around in confusion as the uniformed officers demanded she step off the plane, their tone cold and dismissive. What they didn't know, what no one on that plane knew, was that the woman they were mishandling was not just any traveler. She was a billionaire CEO, a major investor, and the financial backbone behind the very airline choosing to humiliate her. Welcome back to Swift Tale, where we uncover the twists, turns, and hidden truths behind some of the most jaw-dropping real-life stories. And if you're visiting for the very first time, let me ask you something. Do you enjoy powerful stories filled with drama, justice, and unexpected endings? If your answer is yes, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another tale. Today's story exposes a shocking incident that begins with discrimination, but ends with a $5 billion decision that shakes an entire corporation to its core. In this video, we'll break down how a successful black CEO went from being wrongly pulled off a plane to pulling her multi-billion-dollar funding from the airline, sending ripples through the industry and sparking global conversation. This story matters because it reminds us that respect should never be based on appearances, titles, or assumptions. It's about power, dignity, accountability, and what happens when the people you underestimate turn out to be the ones holding everything together. So sit tight, buckle up, and get ready, because this is a tale the airline wishes had never happened, but one you absolutely need to hear. Long before she became the woman whose decisions could shift billions, she was a little girl with big dreams, raised in a neighborhood where success wasn't promised, but ambition was her constant companion. Growing up, she watched her mother work 2 jobs while telling her, "Never let anyone decide your worth for you." Those words shaped her into a force the world couldn't ignore. She excelled in school, earning scholarships that carried her through a top-tier university where she studied economics and business strategy. Even then, she stood out, not because she tried to, but because excellence was her natural language. By the time she entered the corporate world, she had already built a reputation for brilliance, discipline, and an unshakable sense of self-worth. Her rise was anything but accidental. She worked tirelessly, late nights, early mornings, and meetings most people would crumble under. Every challenge only sharpened her skills, pushing her from analyst to executive, and eventually to the CEO seat of a global investment firm. Under her leadership, the firm grew rapidly, earning her recognition as one of the most influential women in finance. Still, despite her power and wealth, she stayed grounded, valuing respect and fairness above all. When the opportunity arose to invest heavily in a major airline, an airline struggling to modernize and stay afloat, she saw potential. She injected $5 billion into the company, funding new aircrafts, tech upgrades, and key expansions. To everyone, she was the visionary behind the airline's rebirth. But to the staff who pulled her off the plane that day, she was just another passenger. Her story up to that moment is a testament to resilience, intelligence, and grace under pressure. She didn't climb to the top by demanding respect, she earned it, which is exactly why the humiliation she faced at the airport wasn't just unfair, it was a slap in the face to everything she had built. And soon enough, the airline would learn just how costly that mistake would be. The morning of the incident began like any other, a quiet sunrise, a neatly packed suitcase, and a calendar full of back-to-back meetings on the West Coast. As the CEO stepped out of her townhouse, she carried the calm confidence of someone who had mastered balancing power with grace. Her driver greeted her respectfully, already aware of her no-nonsense schedule. The ride to the airport was smooth, the kind where the hum of the engine allowed her a moment to skim through reports, approve proposals, and mentally prepare for a major meeting she was scheduled to attend in just a few hours. Ironically, the very meeting she was racing to would discuss expanding the airline she helped save, an airline built, in part, on the $5 billion she had invested. Arriving at the airport, she moved effortlessly through the terminal, dressed in a crisp suit that quietly commanded respect. She wasn't flashy, and she didn't need to be, her presence alone spoke volumes. At the check-in counter, she greeted the attendant politely, unaware that this ordinary interaction would later contrast sharply with the chaos to come. She made her way through security, answering a few emails along the way, none of which hinted at the storm waiting for her inside the aircraft. As she boarded, she noticed the familiar hum of passengers settling in, families arranging luggage, business travelers reviewing notes, attendants getting people to their seats. Nothing felt off yet. Her seat, a first-class window spot, offered a view of the glowing tarmac. She placed her bag beneath her seat and prepared to catch her breath before the flight. A flight attendant approached her with a polite but distant tone, the kind that teeters between formality and suspicion. It was subtle, barely noticeable at first, but her instincts caught the shift. She brushed it off, choosing not to assume the worst. Still, something was different about the atmosphere on that plane. A few passengers glanced her way longer than usual, as if piecing together their own assumptions. A crew member whispered to another near the galley. Nothing was said openly, but the energy in the air had changed. Unbeknownst to her, one mistaken assumption, one incorrect report from a staff member who thought she did fit the profile for a first-class flyer, had begun circulating among the crew. A seed of doubt, rooted not in facts but in bias, had been planted. And while she remained unaware, calmly reviewing her notes and preparing for her meeting, the first quiet steps toward the confrontation were already being taken. Security had been called, a misunderstanding was being escalated, and the flight that was supposed to carry her toward progress was about to become the battleground for an incident that would shake an entire airline to its core. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a shadow stretching across her aisle. The CEO looked up from her tablet to see a flight attendant standing rigidly beside her, lips pressed tightly together, eyes filled with a forced authority that didn't match the moment. "Ma'am," the attendant said, voice clipped, "we need you to step off the plane with us." The air around her seemed to thicken, conversations halted, heads turned. Confusion rippled the cabin like a sudden gust of wind. She blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. "Is there a problem?" she asked, calm and composed. But instead of an explanation, the attendant gave a stiff nod toward the front, an order, not an answer. Seconds later, two uniformed security officers appeared, their presence far heavier than the situation deserved. Passengers exchanged stunned glances, whispers rising like static. The CEO held her breath, her heartbeat steady but alert. This wasn't her first encounter with prejudice. No successful black woman rises through corporate fire without developing thick skin, but there was something different about this moment, something harsh, something intentional. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one of the officers said, his tone cold, rehearsed, dismissive, like he had already decided the story without hearing a single fact. "We've received a complaint about your behavior." The accusation hit her like ice. Behavior? She hadn't spoken to anyone except the attendant who had taken her boarding pass. "What behavior?" she asked firmly. No answer. The officer simply gestured toward the aisle again, impatience leaking through his tightening jaw. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some recorded discreetly. Others watched openly, their eyes wide with disbelief, or in some cases, curiosity tinged with judgment. The CEO rose slowly, refusing to let her dignity be stripped away with haste. "I'd like to know what this is about," she repeated, meeting each security officer's gaze head-on. But their responses were clipped and robotic. They weren't interested in answers. They were interested only in removal. As she stepped into the aisle, a woman from the opposite row whispered, "She didn't do anything," another murmured, "This is wrong." Yet the crew and security pushed forward, ignoring the growing discomfort of the passengers. One officer lightly took hold of her arm, unnecessary, unwelcome. She stiffened but didn't react. She knew her power, she knew her worth. But in that moment, they didn't. To them, she was just another passenger to be escorted out, just another body to move, just another inconvenience. The walk toward the aircraft door felt like a mile-long corridor of humiliation. Her heels clicked against the floor, echoing in the silent cabin. Every step was a reminder of the assumptions being placed on her, assumptions rooted not in truth, but in the quiet, insidious biases people carried without ever questioning. And as she reached the front of the plane, her mind was no longer confused. It was clear, crystal clear. The question was no longer, "Why is this happening?" but "How far will they take this?" What she didn't know was that this moment, this forced, unjust walk off the aircraft, would become the spark that ignited the downfall of an entire airline. Once she stepped off the plane, the bustling noise of the terminal seemed to fade into a blur. Passengers whispered among themselves, their eyes following her every move, while some discreetly captured the scene on their phones. She stood there, composed yet unshaken, facing the officers and airline staff who had just humiliated her moments ago. Their faces told a story of surprise and confusion, their confidence faltering as she met their stares without fear. She could feel the tension crackling in the air, a mix of shame and authority colliding in a single moment. "Let's clarify something," she began, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the murmurs around her. "I'm not the problem here. I'm a major investor in this airline, and you just forced me off my own flight." The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable, yet the staff seemed to falter in their understanding. Some officers shifted awkwardly, realizing the gravity of what had just occurred, while others tried to maintain an air of control, though it was slipping through their fingers. Witnesses who had been recording began sharing their videos on social media, and almost instantly, the incident started to spread. Comments of outrage and disbelief poured in online. The CEO's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaotic energy around her, demonstrating the power she wielded, not through aggression, but through composure, intelligence, and the unmistakable weight of her influence. She had been wronged, yes, but she was not powerless. Behind the scenes, she quietly made a few phone calls, speaking to her legal team and corporate advisors, carefully calculating her next move. She wasn't reacting emotionally. This was strategic, deliberate. Her mind was already moving several steps ahead, anticipating how she could turn this moment of humiliation into one of undeniable authority. Every gesture, every word, every calm breath she took was a reminder that the airline had just underestimated someone who could control their entire financial future. Meanwhile, the airline staff scrambled, attempting explanations that were weak at best. Miscommunication, mistaken identity, and vague complaints were cited, but no apology had been offered yet. The CEO's presence alone highlighted the absurdity of the situation. She was neither aggressive nor vengeful, yet her very composure demanded accountability. Passengers and bystanders watched in awe as she navigated the chaos, demonstrating the poise and intelligence that had earned her billions, and showing everyone present that this incident was far from over. The airport terminal, once an ordinary place of transit, had now become the stage for a lesson in respect, power, and consequence. In that moment, the CEO silently decided that the airline would soon understand the cost of underestimating her, and that the story that had begun with humiliation would end with a force the company could never ignore. The irony of the situation was almost unbearable. The very airline that had benefited from her billions, the infrastructure, the expansion, the sleek new aircraft, had no idea who they had just humiliated. As she stood in the terminal, phone in hand, she realized that their ignorance wasn't just a mistake, it was systemic. The staff who had forced her off the plane had acted on assumptions, prejudices, and incomplete information. They saw a black woman sitting in first class and immediately constructed a narrative that fit their narrow expectations. It was a reminder of the biases embedded within the institution, and she felt a quiet fury at the audacity of their ignorance. Passengers who had witnessed the incident began to whisper among themselves, exchanging puzzled looks. Some approached staff, asking why the situation had escalated so dramatically. One flight attendant muttered under her breath, "I didn't know she was," but the words never left her lips. The realization was starting to seep in. Slow and uncomfortable, this wasn't just a passenger, they had just humiliated one of the airline's most powerful investors. Yet the staff still seemed hesitant to confront the truth, trapped in disbelief and the fear of admitting error. Meanwhile, the CEO remained composed, using their hesitation to her advantage. She quietly coordinated with her corporate team, outlining a strategy that would ensure accountability without letting her emotions dictate her actions. Every call she made, every step she took, was calculated. She understood the airline's internal culture and knew that humiliation alone wouldn't change anything. They needed leverage, and she held it in abundance. At the same time, she observed how the airline attempted damage control. Junior staff scrambled to find her identity, checking names, social media, and corporate records. Emails were sent, phone calls made, all while the clock ticked and the passengers who had witnessed the incident began posting clips online. The viral videos spread quickly, forcing even upper management to confront the embarrassment and the error they had collectively made. Yet, despite the panic behind closed doors, the CEO remained unshaken. Her calm power contrasted sharply with their frantic ignorance. They still didn't realize that the woman standing before them, the one they had treated with disdain, was the same person who had invested $5 billion into their company. Every passing second made the tension more unbearable for the airline, and when the realization finally hit, it would be too late to undo the damage. The scales of control had already begun to tip, and she was the one holding them steady, ready to decide just how far that leverage would go. Once the airline fully grasped who they had just humiliated, the room fell into stunned silence. The realization struck them like lightning. The very woman they had treated with disregard was not only an investor, but the single largest financial pillar supporting their operations. And she had the power to make decisions that could topple entire projects, cancel expansions, and shake their stock value overnight. Calmly, the CEO stepped into action, not out of anger, but with precise, strategic intent. This was not revenge, it was accountability. Seated at her private terminal lounge, she opened her laptop and began communicating with her board and legal team. Every word she typed was deliberate, every call measured. She explained the situation succinctly. The airline had publicly and unnecessarily humiliated her, demonstrating gross negligence and bias. Her instructions were clear. She was immediately freezing the $5 billion investment that had been earmarked for expansion, new aircraft, and technological upgrades. The impact would be immediate and severe. At the airline's headquarters, chaos erupted. Executives scrambled to find ways to mitigate the fallout, calling meetings, making desperate calls, trying to negotiate with her, but she held the cards. Her calm voice over the phone carried the weight of billions. "I've invested my trust, my money, and my time into this company. That trust has been violated. Until I see genuine accountability, the funding is on hold." The stark reality set in. They had underestimated her power, her influence, and her unwillingness to be treated as anything less than respected. Social media amplified the situation. Clips of her being removed from the plane went viral, and the public's outrage matched the financial impact her decision created. The CEO didn't need to yell or threaten, the numbers spoke for themselves. Suddenly, the airline's executives were facing not only an internal crisis, but a public spectacle. Headlines blared. Billionaire CEO pulls $5 billion investment after airline humiliates her. Every second of delay meant mounting financial and reputational consequences. Through it all, she remained composed, a figure of calm authority amid the storm. She understood power intimately, and she wielded it with precision. This was a lesson in respect, accountability, and the consequences of underestimating someone whose influence extended far beyond their immediate view. In one decisive move, the CEO had turned humiliation into power, proving that dignity, strategy, and leverage are tools more formidable than anger or confrontation. The airline had misjudged her completely, and the cost of that misjudgment was already being calculated in billions. The moment her decision to freeze the $5 billion funding hit the airline, panic swept through headquarters like wildfire. Executives ran between offices, voice raised over phone calls, desperately trying to understand how they had miscalculated so profoundly. Stock prices began to tremble, investors nervously calling for explanations, and analysts predicting a ripple effect that could shake the airline for months. The very backbone of their expansion, the projects they had celebrated just weeks earlier, was suddenly paralyzed. Their pride and arrogance had collided headfirst with reality, and the fallout was instantaneous. Outside the walls of corporate offices, the public weighed in with force. Videos from the terminal, captured by shocked passengers, went viral within hours. Social media erupted with anger, astonishment, and solidarity. Millions of eyes watched as the airline scrambled, realizing far too late that they had humiliated one of the most powerful figures in the financial world. The CEO's calm composure in the face of mistreatment contrasted sharply with the airline's flailing response, turning her into a symbol of dignity, resilience, and accountability. Attempts at damage control only made matters worse. Press releases were rushed, apologies sounded hollow, and internal memos leaked to journalists. Every misstep became another story, another headline. The company's credibility, already shaky from the incident, now teetered dangerously on the brink. Investors questioned leadership, employees murmured in hallways about mismanagement, and the public demanded answers. The airline's reputation, built over decades, was crumbling in real time, and the CEO's strategic restraint was the sharpest blow of all. Yet amid the chaos, she remained untouchable. While executives panicked and scrambled to appease a market that had lost confidence, she moved methodically, coordinating with her board to ensure that her leverage remained unchallenged. Every delay, every misstep by the airline reinforced her position. Her actions were not driven by vengeance, but by principle, by the expectation that respect, accountability, and fairness are non-negotiable. By the end of the day, the airline understood something stark and undeniable. They had underestimated the power of the very person who had built a significant portion of their future. In their attempt to exert control over her, they had lost control over themselves, their finances, and their public image. What had begun as a humiliating incident on a flight had now evolved into a corporate reckoning, one that would leave the airline forever changed, and the CEO standing firmly, unshaken, at the center of it all. With the world watching, the CEO decided it was time to speak, not with anger, but with clarity and authority. In a statement that would be shared across news outlets, social media platforms, and financial publications, she addressed the incident directly, leaving no room for misinterpretation. "What happened on that flight was unacceptable," she said, her voice calm, measured, yet resonating with undeniable power. "It was not just a personal affront. It was a reflection of a culture that undervalues dignity, fairness, and respect. Accountability is not optional, it is mandatory." Her words were not only a personal response, but a universal message about justice, equality, and the responsibility of institutions to act with integrity. Her statement went further, calling for tangible changes within the airline industry. She advocated for staff training on bias, transparent protocols for handling disputes, and clear accountability structures to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. She emphasized that no individual, regardless of appearance, status, or background, should ever face humiliation based on assumptions or prejudice. The world listened, not just because of her wealth or influence, but because her story represented something far bigger: the intersection of power, respect, and social justice. The CEO also used the moment to inspire others. She spoke directly to women, minorities, and anyone who had faced systemic injustice. Her message was simple but powerful. Strength is not only measured by financial success, but by the ability to remain composed, strategic, and principled when challenged. She demonstrated that true power comes not from retaliation, but from understanding the weight of one's influence and using it wisely. In the days that followed, her statement sparked conversations around the globe. Industry leaders acknowledged the need for reform, and social media amplified her message, making it clear that respect and accountability cannot be negotiated, they are mandatory. The airline, once scrambling to contain the fallout, now faced the consequences of their ignorance in a world that would no longer accept excuses. Her measured, strategic response not only reclaimed her dignity, but reshaped the conversation about power, privilege, and corporate responsibility. By the end of this chapter, the CEO had done more than protect herself, she had set a precedent. She showed the world that standing firm in the face of injustice can transform humiliation into a lesson of leadership, integrity, and unshakable authority. As the dust settled from one of the most astonishing corporate showdowns in recent memory, the lesson was clear: respect and accountability are not optional, they are essential. The CEO's journey from being wrongfully removed from a plane to leveraging her $5 billion investment to demand justice was more than a story of wealth or power. It was a story of dignity, strategy, and the consequences of underestimating someone whose influence you take for granted. For the airline, the incident became a wake-up call. For the world, it became a symbol of what happens when courage meets intelligence, patience, and calculated action. Her story reminds us that setbacks, humiliation, or bias do not define us, how we respond does. By remaining composed, decisive, and strategic, she transformed a moment of injustice into one of transformative power. And while the airline learned its lesson in a very costly way, the broader message resonates for everyone. The combination of respect, principle, and influence can shift outcomes in ways no one expects. Here on Swift Tale, we tell these stories not just for shock value, but to inspire, educate, and remind audiences that every challenge carries a lesson, and every act of injustice can be met with courage. If this story left you as stunned and inspired as it did us, don't keep it to yourself, share it, like it, and subscribe to Swift Tale so you never miss another incredible story. And I want to hear from you. Comment below with your thoughts. How would you have handled this situation? Have you ever faced a moment where respect was denied, but justice was possible? Your voice matters just as much as this story, so join the conversation, share your perspective, and let's keep uncovering the unbelievable tales that make us think, reflect, and act. The flight may have ended for her that day, but the impact of her actions continues to soar, proof that strength, dignity, and intelligence always leave a lasting mark.